Expendable pawns in a cynical game of chess. At least 7 migrants so far have died in the freezing no man's land at Belarus's border with the European Union. Minsk under sanctions over last year's post-electoral crackdown ordered by strongman Alexander Lukashenko. His regime's accused of encouraging charter flights from Iraq and Turkey, and then sending the passengers towards the border. Neighboring Lithuania wonders how thousands have come their way this year compared with 80 migrants for all of 2020. The weaponization of migrants to pressure EU states is nothing new. See Brussels' current compensation deals with Libya and Turkey. But ahead of Thursday's European summit, the bloc's got really 2 problems in one. How to stand up to a ruthless regime that, when push comes to shove, knows it can fall back on the protection of its former Soviet masters in Moscow. On that score, we'll ask about the weekend's expulsion of France's ambassador to Belarus. And then there's Poland's hard-right nationalist government, which ever since 2015, when it had no migrant crisis of its own, has made political hay out of towing a tough line on foreigners, particularly Muslim foreigners, imposing a media blackout on the border area, and now talking of a Donald Trump-style wall with a broader rule of law issue showdown with Brussels coming to a head. Which way forward now? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what to do about the handling of migrants at Europe's border, and in particular at Belarus's border. Joining us from Vilnius, Belarus journalist Hanna Lyubukova, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for speaking with us.
Hello, good evening.
Joining us from Lithuania, she is the former defense minister there. Rasa Juknechiene is a member of the European Parliament from the Homeland Union Christian Democratic Party. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Hello.
Former diplomat Yves Dutriot is France's former ambassador to the OSCE, the group that monitors crises across the continent. Today, professor of geopolitics at Paris Dauphine University.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us. And from Kiev, you'll see his exclusive report from the no man's land at the Polish border soon. France 24 correspondent Gulliver Cragg is with us. How are you?
All right, thanks.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Let's talk about that expulsion of the French ambassador. Seems like it wasn't enough. Belarus this Monday recalling its ambassador in Paris for consultation. This after Sunday's departure of French envoy Nicolas de Bouillon de Lacoste. Monty Francis has that story.
France's ambassador to Belarus, Nicolas de Lacoste, left Minsk under tenuous circumstances over the weekend. The government of strongman Alexander Lukashenko did not provide a reason, but de Lacoste said he had not met with Lukashenko to give him copies of his credentials after being named to the post last year.
Let me send you a goodbye message today. My wife and I, unfortunately, have to leave Belarus. As you know, France did not recognize the result of the August 9, 2020 election, and I did not hand over my credentials.
His departure comes at a time of heightened tensions with France and the rest of the EU. The bloc has refused to recognize Lukashenko's election to a 6th term last year. A post-election crackdown on massive protests and dissent led the EU to impose sanctions on Belarus, and there was a further condemnation after Belarusian officials forced a commercial airline to make a U-turn and land in Minsk so they could arrest an opposition journalist. Compounding the rift, a humanitarian crisis is unfolding along the border between Belarus and Poland, and Lukashenko faces accusations of flying undocumented immigrants into Poland and the Baltics. Latvia's foreign minister is urging the EU to sanction national airline Belavia for transporting the migrants.
And we need to introduce more stricter sanctions, especially taking into account that Belarus and Mr. Lukashenko is still continuing to use migration as a hybrid weapon, and I think that we seriously need to consider more pressure.
Belarus is becoming more and more diplomatically isolated, having already expelled other diplomats from its territory, including those from Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia.
Yves Dutriot, what is it like? You're the French ambassador, so you go, you give your letters of credential to the foreign ministry.
A copy of it, and then the original to the head of state.
That's how it usually works.
Yes, exactly.
In this case, I mean, he showed up exactly a year ago in November, a little less than a year ago, in November of 2020, and never goes to the to the presidency in Minsk. What was that like for him, do you think?
I don't know exactly what happened, but the background is very clear. There are a lot of tensions between EU and Belarus, and the last evidence of these tensions are these migrants now blocked at the border. But you refer to the hijacking of Ryanair air flight, and before that, August 2020, these fake presidential elections that has triggered after that arrestation and even torture of opponents. So
we've seen
there were sanctions from the EU sides, countermeasures from the Belarus sides, and that's the background of what happened to the ambassador.
Because we've seen in the past French ambassadors who had to leave because their letters of credential were never accepted. That's happened before. But is this a first where the ambassador shows up in a country and never submits his letters of credential?
I'm not aware of this peculiar precedent. I'm aware of precedent of ambassador made persona non grata, or even ambassador, as you said, where they were refused to present their credentials.
French ambassador Madagascar comes
in Madagascar, yes, because of...
It's a long story.
It's a long story.
Hanna Lyubokova, your reaction to this story?
Well, I think that's a very strong sign of solidarity on behalf of France and on behalf of the French ambassador, Nicolas Delacoste. The Western countries, EU countries, did not recognize the election results last year, so they did not recognize Lukashenko as the legitimate leader. So why should ambassadors go and present credentials to the illegitimate leader? So let's remember that President Macron was one of the first leaders to meet with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and France did a lot to support the pro-democracy movement in Belarus. So that was kind of another step, another sign of solidarity from France and from Mr. Delacoste.
Your reaction as well, Raza Yuknevichiene.
My reaction is, first of all, thank you for solidarity, because it's really, we have, all of us, we have a very big problem, huge problem in the middle of European continent, dictatorship, which is so brutal, as we see now with this artificially founded so-called migration crisis, because it's not migration crisis as usual, it is a hybrid attack against the European Union. And and I think it's very important to have unity in the European Union and all over the world, around the world with all democratic countries, because I know myself that it's not forever. So we have to do everything the best to help Belarus people to solve this problem on their homeland.
You call it a hybrid attack, those migrants coming.
Yes, we call it hybrid attack. It is not the same migration crisis as usual, because it was artificially orchestrated by Lukashenko, because we know that he deliberately looking for people around the world. It's not only from Iraq, even people from Cuba, from other countries, from Syria now. He's looking for them, transporting them to Belarus by planes in order for them to cross the EU border. And his services, his infrastructure, all, people close to Lukashenko, they help them to cross the border, and they are pushed to enter EU territory, and yet he makes money from that. So it is very serious, but we have to be consolidated and in very high solidarity, and we need new steps, active steps to push back Lukashenko from his position.
Gulliver Cragg, talk us through the timeline of what's happened since August, when there started to be this influx of migrants at the border with the EU.
It's a question for me.
It was Lithuania who first started noting an increase in the number of migrants that were trying to cross from Belarus, and I think it started in July, and through the summer it was more going towards Lithuania, but already in August, when I was in Minsk, that was in late August, the route was starting to be predominantly towards Poland. I met people in Minsk who were Kurds from Iraq who said that, actually one of them said that he'd tried to cross into Lithuania, and another one said that he'd been refused entry to Poland already 3 times. Now the situation of these people wasn't so bad compared to what's happening now, because they had at least been able to come back to Minsk, and they were feeling extremely angry, disappointed, annoyed. They'd spent a lot of money, and they weren't rich people, on trying to make this journey, and now they were saying that they were just going to go back to Iraq. But what's happening now is much worse, because Belarus isn't letting people back into Belarus once they have made an attempt to cross the border into Poland and been refused entry by the Polish border guards, which is why they're now getting stuck in between the two countries, basically in a sort of game of ping-pong back and forth, involving days-long journeys on foot across these forests where the temperature gets down to at least -8 in November. As you said already, 7 people are known to have died.
Yeah, you mentioned that trip to Minsk back in August. Let's take a look at your report that you filed for France 24, Gulliver Cragg.
Outside this hotel in Minsk, migrants chat and swap stories. Most don't want to be filmed and are gloomy. This man, a Kurd from Erbil, had been hoping to travel to Lithuania and on from there to Germany. Anwar, who's from Yemen, says he already tried a few times to get to Poland.
المعاملة هناك سيئة جدا للغاية، يعني ممكن الشرطة والجنود الأسباء الحرس الحدود البولندي يمسكوا يتم القبض علينا ويتم ركلنا ويتم ضربنا.
Some migrants, including some Afghans, as here, have found themselves stuck right on the border between each side's forces. Human rights lawyers say that's illegal.
W tym momencie, kiedy funkcjonariusz zatrzymuje cudzoziemca na granicy, a cudzoziemiec deklaruje zamiar ubiegania się o polską ochronę międzynarodową, Straż Graniczna ma obowiązek przyjąć od niego wniosek.
Both Poland and Lithuania say that rule doesn't apply in these circumstances. They accuse Belarus of weaponizing the migrants by sending them to the border under false illusions. Minsk neither confirms nor denies. No Belarusian government official responded to our request for an interview about this situation, but at his press conference on the 9th of August, Alexander Lukashenko did describe it as a consequence of the European Union's sanctions on Belarus. Meanwhile, feeling used, out of pocket and despondent, these men say they're heading back to Iraq.
And Gulliver, as you were saying a moment ago, this has gotten much worse since then, what with all those people now stuck in the no man's land. Did you see this coming?
Well, one thing I'd like to add is that since I made that report, I did get a response from the Belarusian border guard, and they basically don't deny that they're doing this. They do deny that it's for political reasons. They say that since the European Union banned Belarusian planes from its airspace, they have had to look for other markets, and that's why they've been trying to develop tourism, people coming from other countries, and it's for commercial reasons that large numbers of people from countries like Iraq have started coming to Belarus. I mean, that sounds rather disingenuous, but that is the line that they take. They are willing to communicate about it, and they're very interested in painting the Poles in as dark a light as possible and putting the emphasis on Polish brutality towards migrants and Polish unfairness of sending the migrants back, in which there is some truth, but the Poles will also tell you pretty awful stories, and the migrants would also tell you pretty awful stories about the way that they're being treated by the Belarusian border guards when they try to go back into Belarus, or indeed in some cases on their way to the border, where it appears that the Belarusians, at least in one case that I heard about, informed someone that they're going to cross at a regular border crossing, and then it turns out that of course not. They're going to be asked to walk through the forest, which is not at all what they were expecting, but they don't have any choice by the time they're there. And I mean, all sorts of different and pretty awful stories that you hear from the migrants. I mean, did we see it coming? Well, I wasn't able at the time to predict how the numbers would increase, but they have massively increased since August. And at the moment, as far as I'm aware, are continuing to increase, at least in terms of the numbers that the Polish border guard are saying that they are catching, trying to cross into Poland, even as the temperatures plummet, making the journey very, very much more dangerous.
And you're preparing a follow-up report. You recently were at that border.
Yeah, we went for Observers Direct, France 24's programme Observers Direct, because we had a lot of videos that were being sent into France 24 by observers, by viewers, asking us to go and verify what's going on the ground. So with my colleague Maëva Poulet, the week before last, we spent a few days there trying to get some more information, and that's coming out soon. A little plug there for you.
A little plug there that's important. Let me ask you, Ambassador, because a spokesperson for Germany's Interior Ministry this Monday saying they've had some 4,500 illegal entries from Poland registered since August. They're noticing a spike as well. Your reaction to what's going on, to what you heard the Raza Yuknevechiene describe as hybrid warfare?
The word hybrid warfare has been used by NATO and by the Frontex leader, and the European Union agency in charge of helping border countries like Poland or Lithuania or Italy, Greece, Spain to better protect their external borders. So the word is exactly what's going on. And you refer to cynicism. It's pure cynicism to use the misery of those people coming from Middle East or even Africa to explain that they are going to Belarus for tourism, which is a fake argument, obviously. They were offered visa-free to go to Belarus, and with only one aim is to use these people, men, women, even children, in their reaction to European sanctions to Lukashenko, because of what we said earlier, the fake elections, arrestation of opponents, and so on and so forth. So now there is another issue, which is the issue of migrations. And perhaps some of them could propose their request for asylum as asylum seeker. But we were told that there is no Syrians, for instance. And you may know that Syrians, because of the civil war in Syria, can get easily, if I may say so, the statute of political protection, international protection inside the European Union because of their statute.
There are Syrians.
But
there are Syrians, says Gulliver Cragg.
Yes.
We saw in his report people from Yemen,
yes,
people from
but in the case of Syrians, I was told that they would get in any way the statute, and this is the responsibility of border states.
Well, let me ask Raza Yuknevechiene about this. What is Lithuania's stance towards people who are stuck in the no man's land with your country? How do you treat them? What is your policy?
In August, because we got more than 4,000 people per few weeks in July. And of course, we had to react, and our government implemented so-called pushback politics. And those people, they are already inside the country. Now they are getting, at least minimum for their life, because we were not ready at all. for such a situation. And now it's the process going on, asylum seeking process. And all of those people, they came from Belarus as tourists. It's already were mentioned. And they came not as people,
Seeking asylum.
Seeking asylum somewhere in legal places. So they are told when they come via forests, fields, and during the night, usually during the night, they are told that they can ask for asylum legally in the positions where it is already mentioned on our legally. We are accepting people. For example, from Afghanistan, we even our military rescued more than 100 interpreters. They were together with us in Afghanistan, and many people, by the way, from Belarus.
But the people who are being sent over from Belarus, are you sending them back the way Poland is?
They are not allowed to come because it's no other way how to deal with that. And they are asked if they want to ask legally asylum or go back to Belarus because they have visas. They have visas for tourism. They bought not very cheap tickets. They have money, by the way, many of them. And on the other hand, they also can ask for asylum in Belarus if they came to Belarus, country which is not under the war. So it is of course not easy process. We're trying to select people, people working on the border. They are trying to select people with women, with children, sick people, so they are allowed to come. But not those. Sometimes they are just, trying to get into European Union. And of course, the final destination is not Lithuania. The final destination is Germany. Now we have in European Union, secondary migration of this crisis, and Germany is alarming on what's going on their border with Poland, because many people are coming pushed by Lukashenko
So let me ask you, Raza Yukavence, when you look at the past, at the track record of the European Union, when Muammar Gaddafi was in charge in Libya, it was Italy and the EU basically paying him off to keep migrants from crossing. Today, there's a deal with authorities in Libya that Frontex has. There was the cash payments that are being made by the EU to Turkey to stop the migrant flow. With Belarus, is it going to end with some kind of cash compensation?
It is not the same case. Belarus it's not natural route of migration, this route. Because Lukashenko artificially orchestrated it. So, and he himself now, he has problem because inside country, we saw videos, many of them recently, that thousands of people are in the airport. They live there because he made this visa-free regime for many countries, not only Iraq. But for example, Iraq, I would like to congratulate and to say thank you for Iraqi government, because they stopped flights from Baghdad to Minsk, and it's now Lukashenko is looking for people in other countries. So we need to elaborate very serious measures how to stop it, not paying cash to Lukashenko, of course, but trying, for example, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gabrielius Landsbergis, proposed today no-fly zone for commercial flights over Belarus. And we need more serious attempts to try to stop it.
Hanna Lyubukova, your thoughts on what it says about Belarus today? Is this Alexander Lukashenko, what they used to call in Soviet times, making mischief, needling the West, or is it a desperate move?
I think it's actually both. First of all, it's a revenge to the West because of sanctions, because of this sort of strong responses that European countries employed after the Ryanair hijacking and in relation to human rights violations in Belarus. And it's important to continue responding with a really sort of strict measures to what Lukashenko is doing. It's not possible to pay him because, as it was sort of discussed before, because Lukashenko was paid before. He kind of was paid by the EU to strengthen the border. So now what he's doing is actually human trafficking, essentially. So strict measures such as economic sanctions, such as diplomatic and political isolation, all these justice efforts, all these international tribunals, UN resolutions, international mechanisms should be taken into consideration, and more should be done to stop him. Sanctions might not be working well so far because, well, this is not a problem of sanctions, but this is a problem of how they were employed. Those loopholes that were left after the previous round of EU sanctions against the Belarusian regime should be closed. And I'm talking about oil, I'm talking about potash sectors. Belarus, the regime is still able to trade with potash and oil, and this is a very important source of export money for the regime. And these funds are being misused, and that's important to remember, that not kind of people are not punished by those sanctions. It's the regime that is punished by them.
But Hannah, let me ask you, do you get the sense now, because since August of 2020 and that contested presidential election, we have seen Lukashenko get more and more drawn in on the Russian side. Russia is the sort of the force looming over all of this. How far will sanctions get you if Vladimir Putin has your back?
I think the Kremlin has also limits when it comes to the way and the willingness as it's ready to support Lukashenko. Lukashenko is becoming very toxic for the Kremlin, for Putin himself. So we should remember that. We should kind of break their relationship as well. We should say, the West and other countries should say that all these agreements between Lukashenko and Putin should not be recognized, so that the Kremlin does not have intentions to annex Belarus or to buy some enterprises that Lukashenko might be willing to sell. So I think there are limits to, firstly, to the extent the Kremlin is ready to support Lukashenko, and to the extent that Lukashenko is ready to agree to some integration issues and so on. We should not be scared of that. We should make Lukashenko very toxic for the Kremlin.
But is there also the possibility that, Russia could just be sick of it all and put in its own person in charge? Is that something Belarusians fear, that the regime change could come not from the West, but from Moscow?
Unfortunately, this is one of the scenarios we should take into consideration. And this is something, the more we wait, the more Russia wins here, because the time works for Russia. Russia wants to build political capital in Belarus. It hasn't been able to do so before. But again, right, the more Lukashenko is in power, the more Kremlin is allowed to do in Belarus. And now, because independent media is being destroyed, civil society is being destroyed, basically there is no alternative power, no alternative strength inside the country that is able to fight with this Russian propaganda, Russian narratives in Belarus. And we really need to do as much as we can, as fast as we can right now, because, the time is not for us, the time is for Russia, unfortunately.
Time is for Russia, you say. Gulliver Cragg, is a toxic Alexander Lukashenko really a problem for Moscow?
Before I look at that question, there's a point that I wanted to make, which is, I think, important, which is that both Lithuania and Poland are justifying the pushbacks of these migrants by saying that they have the legal right to be in Belarus, so they're not in danger in Belarus. But that's disingenuous. It's not true. Belarus has passed a law saying that they're not letting the migrants back in if they've crossed the border into an EU country, and the Belarusian border guard confirmed that to me, that that's what they're doing. They're not letting the migrants back in unless they require hospitalization. So the fact is that there is a very real danger of these migrants dying in the forests, and saying that is not at all to diminish my appreciation of the fact that this is an extremely difficult situation for Lithuania, Poland and the rest of the European Union to deal with. It's very hard to know what to do in order to, as it were, not let Alexander get away with this new ploy that he is making. But it's disingenuous to say that it's okay to send them back because they'd be perfectly fine in Belarus. That's not true. As for the debate over Putin's support for Alexander Lukashenko, I think that for a very long time yet we may be continuing to see a situation where Russia considers Lukashenko to be the least worst option, really, because any regime change could be seen as, in a way, a victory for the street protests. I don't think there is a person available to Russia who they think would obviously be better than Alexander Lukashenko and palatable to the Belarusian people. So my prediction is that Russia will continue to support Lukashenko unless something changes in some other area or, on the ground.
Which brings us back to the issue of those sanctions. There's that big EU summit coming up on Thursday, and to prepare for it, foreign ministers gathering in Luxembourg this Monday. They discussed the possibility of stopping companies from leasing jets to Belarus's national carrier, Belavia. Now, there's a little bit of a problem. Turns out that many of the planes chartered by Belavia were leased inside of the European Union. They don't own the planes themselves. And the go-to place to rent planes is tax-friendly Ireland. The Irish say they're all for bans on future leasing, but want to honor existing contracts.
How we actually increase the pressure through sanctions is something that Ireland is very much open to. But I think we would also make the distinction between sanctions that would involve no further or future aircraft leasing to Belarus in contrast to existing contracts that are in place where there are legal obligations. So this is a difficult area from a legal perspective.
Raza Yuknevichenye, your reaction to that, do you agree with the Irish foreign minister that they have to honor existing contracts?
I am upset a little bit on that, because I think we have to be more tough on such regimes, and of course commercial, according to my understanding, and as I already mentioned, our Minister of Foreign Affairs mentioned that we have to think about no-fly zone for all civilian commercial flights, and especially those they have any commercial agreements with the Belarus regime. It's unacceptable for me, because this money will go for human trafficking. And regime needs money, and we are supporting him by our commercial structures in European Union. So it is unacceptable. We need much more tough sanctions. We need press Lukashenko more and more, and really to make him toxic to Putin. And unfortunately today I don't see that he's toxic very much to Putin, because without Putin's support, without Kremlin support, Lukashenko would not be able to survive even 1 week or even day, because he rely on everything, depends on Moscow very much, and that's we have to push him in more tough way.
Yves Doutrio?
Yes. No, what I would like, there are many things which were gathered, many information. I want just to react to some of them. Money to Lukashenko, certainly not. We are not, as it was said, in the context of Turkey or Libya or even Morocco. Here it's pure cynicism. He tried to attract people from Middle East or Africa.
But isn't it pure cynicism?
There is no question
Isn't
about
it pure
money.
cynicism to effectively pay off Libya and Turkey to keep migrants from coming?
But as it was said, it was quite different because the migrants came to Libya on their own, if I may say so, or pushed by events like in civil war in Syria. And there are today, as you may know, 4 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. This has nothing to do. There is no common border between Belarus, Middle East, or Africa in the case of Libya. So no money, it's pure cynicism. We are not going to pay for such a cynical behavior. Now, the efficiency of sanctions, political sanctions, economic sanctions, one could have some doubt because we have accumulated a set of sanctions, rightly, but sometimes we could wonder the efficiency of sanctions, especially in the case of Belarus, because of the connection with Russia. So if there is no commercial or political relationship possible with the West, obviously Belarus is going to put in. One could even consider the possibility in the future of annexation or unification between Belarus and Russia. And here it's a problem. Then speaking about solidarity with Lithuania and Poland, I refer already to Frontex, this European Union agency. I understand that the leader of Frontex, who is a French national, by the way, was in Poland a couple of days ago. And Frontex is proposing some material support to Poland and Lithuania, to Poland these days, in order to better protect.
But what does that mean for people who are
border.
stuck in the no man's land? What does that mean? Because
But
if as you heard our reporters say, Belarus is not taking them back, you can't let people freeze to death.
Then you have the humanitarian issue. I refer to asylum seeker. And what about
whether or not they're asylum seekers, if they're stuck in that no man's land,
but then you have a humanitarian issue.
Yeah.
And NGO should be allowed to protect, to support. And
so what do you
I
think?
know that it's a big issue in Poland between those
because Poland's imposed a media blackout at the border. What are your thoughts on that? Because we don't know how Polish police are handling it in that media blackout.
That could be a concern, a humanitarian concern, and NGOs should get access. And the last point is about another possibility for Frontex and for us Europeans is to better inform the countries of origin and the young people, the so-called tourists, that it's a deadlock to go to Belarus. So perhaps I understand that Poland will try to inform better African countries and Middle East countries.
Do you
about
agree
that.
with Raza Yukneveciene that Ireland's position is disappointing, continuing to honor its contracts with Belavia, which is using those?
That's always like that when we are speaking about sanctions, because sometimes with sanctions, we are sanctioning ourselves, and there are some commercial interests. But what is important is that at the end of the day is to have a common behavior, and you have seen that there are so many sanctions today decided by unanimous voting of the EU.
And Gulliver, we will not see common behavior on Thursday at that EU summit when they talk about rule of law in Poland. And it was interesting to watch those demonstrations that took place in Poland, in Warsaw and elsewhere, on Sunday by the opposition against the fact that the policy in that regarding the Belarus border and the intent to build this border wall. Where is it all going as far as Poland goes?
Well, I think there's a lot of issues that you've brought up here in one, because there's the issue of the migrants and the humanitarian crisis. And I think that whatever you think about what migrant policy towards migrants in the European Union ought to be, clearly there's an intolerable situation if people are dying in the woods, whether they're asylum seekers or not. There's a humanitarian emergency, and I think that it's right. And I hope that the European Union will join members of the Polish opposition and the Polish media in calling on Poland to open that area up, at the very least, to humanitarian workers and to the media, so that people can try to help those people and see what's going on. More broadly, there is a very big battle between Poland and the European Union looming over this rule of law issue, because I think that the recent ruling by the Polish Constitutional Tribunal saying that they would not accept the idea that EU law takes precedence precedence over Polish law, at least not in certain areas, which is basically thumb-nosing the European Union and saying we're not going to obey any of your rules about how the justice system must function. Well, that is something that the European Commission, I think, cannot tolerate, cannot be seen to continue to tolerate. But what they're going to do about it, we don't know yet.
If I may, speaking about Hungary, you may remember that the Hungarian government has adopted a so-called anti-Soros law, prohibiting NGO to help migrants at the border of Hungary. And the European institutions were very criticized, and I think the European Court of Justice has published a ruling against this behavior of Hungary. We have exactly more or less a comparable situation at the border.
So it could be at least 25 against 2 when it comes to this issue on this issue.
The best is to be 27 altogether. Okay. Obviously, but it would be difficult.
That's going to be tough on Thursday. Yves Dutrieu, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well Hanna Lybielkova for joining us from Vilnius, Raza Yuknevechny from Lithuania, and Gulliver Cragg, who was in Kiev this Monday. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.